As we commence our last board meeting before spring break, much needed break, I'm sure, for parents, families, caregivers, and our staff. And kids probably want it most. They're getting a little high, as I found in the cooking class today. So I'll call the meeting to order and would like to acknowledge that we are meeting this evening on the territory of the Snanawas and Qualicum First Nations, and we thank them for allowing us to live, work, and play in this beautiful part of Vancouver Island. I will make one adjustment before trustees. I ask for the adoption of the agenda. I would like to move our action items piece, which is the bell time shift, and a motion on the minor capital submissions 11A and B to after our information reports, which encompasses the superintendent's report and our educational report. Our superintendent, Dr. Jory, will be speaking directly to issues around bells and start times and busing and things like that. And I think it would be beneficial for us to hear his counsel before entering into the action items A and B. So with that alteration, we do have an addenda. What the addenda is 11B. So could I have a mover and a seconder, trustees, for the adoption of the agenda? Thank you, Trustee Kellogg. And second, Trustee Austin. All those in favor, trustees? Thank you very much. A mover and a seconder, please, to the approval of the consent agenda as presented. Move Trustee Kellogg, second Trustee Young. All those in favor? Carried. There are no delegations this evening and no early public questions have been submitted. Business arising, none. So I'll call upon Matt Wood from the Mount Arrowsmith Teachers Association. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, good evening. Hi, Wanat, and bonsoir, everyone. Are you able to hear me? I'm having some technical difficulties going on right now, so I see some thumbs up. Excellent, thank you.
No, good
just a couple of points I'd like to make tonight. First, I want to acknowledge and recognize Julie Cloutier, a French immersion teacher from Oceanside Elementary School, and our current MATA in-district Pro-D chair, and her committee for organizing her first district-wide in-district professional development day for teachers in our district on March 1st. I have received many emails from members thanking her for the well-organized day, and many teachers and administrators I know that I talked with and that attended were pleased with the variety of options and so appreciative of the opportunity to learn and grow professionally. Bon travail, Julie. Second, I know I said that, I didn't say that right, but I try.
Yes, that's
second,
good.
On behalf of Taylor Wilson and the KSS Athletic Department, I'd like to take a moment to share the contents of a letter that I'll be submitting to the board regarding Policy 705, corporate community sponsorships, partnerships, and advertising in schools. It begins as follows. I would like to thank all of you for taking the time to hear my request to review this policy a few months ago. As stated before, my goal in this endeavor is to provide our athletes with the highest quality experience possible while minimizing the financial burden on their families. Once more, this past basketball season, as I have traveled up and down the island, I noted that many schools are looking to find additional sources of revenue to help support athletics, and sponsorship banners up in their gyms are becoming more and more common. I understand the impetus to avoid exposing our students to advertising from multinational corporations such as Coke, Pepsi, Nike, or Adidas. Our students get enough exposure from these on their phones, the internet, and television. However, the sponsorships that we would like to pursue are those of small businesses and local companies, many of whom are owned by former KSS students who benefit from our programs and wish to give back. I would contend that the display of fixed small businesses banners could provide a positive impact by showing students possibilities in starting their own small businesses one day, or wishing to seek employment with them within the community in the future. Finally, our coaches volunteer hours, hundreds of hours each year, time away from their own families to give back to the school and students. I wish to limit any added stress on them by having the responsibility to put up and or take down dozens of removable banners each game. I am wondering if there is room to amend this policy, excuse me, to make permanent banners a possibility if it is limited to local small businesses and small companies, while avoiding multinational corporations. There are many examples of this type of advertising in schools and in gyms, in school gyms and other districts up and down the island, and in the spirit of equity, I feel that our district should be allowed to do the same. Sincerely, Taylor Wilson. As this policy is in first reading, MATA looks forward to continued conversation at the next policy meetings in April. Finally, I want to take a moment to speak against the proposed recommendation coming to the board this evening regarding bell shifts for September 2024. I want to be clear that my objection to this recommendation is not based on the merit nor the possible necessity of such a change, but strictly, as I'm sure I will find out later on in this meeting, but strictly is with the process in place. At the last board meeting, Superintendent Drury spoke about student absenteeism and discussed the immediacy of restructuring bell schedules at 3 schools slightly to address some concerns with busing. We will not fully understand those effects of this immediate change and whether it will solve any of the issues it has intended. MATA is still unsure why there is no recommendation brought to the board regarding this change. I urge the board to defeat this motion because the motion is vague. It seems rushed, and I believe it has not followed due process. First, the arbitrary number of a 10-minute shift in bell times is both vague and limited in its scope. There are too many unknowns for this recommendation to be accepted. It would appear that the ask is simply to move start times by up to 10 minutes. However, it does not take into account all the other complexities that evolve when changing schedules. Things like lunch times being shortened or lengthened, busing, individual concerns at sites are unknown, supports necessary to implement the change, such as before and after school duties and activities, are unknown. After school athletic and extracurricular programs structures are unknown. The number of students affected is unknown. How will addressing one bell schedule affect all the other bell schedules is unknown. What does a 10-minute shift in a bell schedule look like is unknown. Has there been enough time for educational partners to be well informed? There is a concern by MATA that by accepting this motion, there is a strong possibility that lunch times may be shortened, as well as no possibility to increase lunch times to meet the needs of a school. Even by a few minutes, this could have a huge impact on programs, student engagement, and the healthy functioning of a school day. Second, this recommendation seems premature and rushed, and MATA and I fail to understand the immediacy of this request. Thirdly, and most importantly, MATA does not feel that this recommendation has followed any due process. There's no briefing note to support the recommendation. There's been no time for school administrators to meet with teachers or their DPACs to discuss possible changes. There's been no time for all educational partners to provide input on actual changes. I am told that the new routing software has the capability to provide multiple scenarios. This has not been implemented or applied. It may be possible that a school will decide to start 15 minutes later, as it would make sense within the system, but this recommendation would not allow this. We changed our bell schedule many years ago for reasons largely unknown or that I can remember, with the only exception and understanding was that busing determines all bell schedules. We now have an opportunity to review bell schedules across the district and develop district-wide bell schedules that support the data, support educational partners, and support the strategic plan and most importantly, will support students. So what is MATA asking? With all respect, Mount Arrowsmith Teachers Association urges this board to defeat this motion and requests that information gathered from the survey be summarized and provided to each school site. That site administrators be given time to discuss with teachers via staff committee meetings and parents via DPAC meeting to bring recommendations forward. That the information gathered at each site be provided to the Curriculum Advisory Implementation Committee, and that the SEAC put forward a recommendation to the board suggesting later start times and supporting shifts in the bell schedule. MATA believes there's time for this process to occur and strongly believes that following this process would provide transparency and a better understanding of and the reasons for the changes and a smooth transition within the system-wide area. Thank you, and as always, working conditions that are good for teachers are also good learning conditions for students. Heichka and Marcy.
Thanks, Matt. QP, Mr. Roycroft, newly elected president. Comments for this evening's board table.
Yeah, I did this month. We've had a Pro D Day, and I'd like to thank Julie Fowler for being the key organizer in that. I also would like to give a huge shout out to Sheila Morrison, who was our keynote speaker, and she spoke to the child care that we have within the school systems and all the different aspects of that and all the different types of school child care that we are providing and how it operates, and really cleared it up for a lot of the EAs and how the interaction works and how many different facets of it are actually out there. She explained many aspects of how this is integrated into the school, into District 69, and how important it is to parents and how much of a necessity it is. It takes a community to raise a child, and I'm glad that School District 69 is now another part of that. Really, really glad that we had a successful Pro D Day. We had a zero budget, and we did a very good job, and we had a lot of good facilitation. I was a facilitator at it for my first time, and it was a pleasure and an honor. So just a big shout out to Sheila Morrison for that and Julie Fowler for organizing it. We've also had some sad news this month as we've lost a bus driver, Paul Clay. He was loved by many and will be truly missed. I would like to personally thank Brent Pronkel for all the work he has done to help everybody deal with this sad loss. And thanks again to everybody at the board for all their hard work that they do every month. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Rycroft. And now DPAC. I don't know who's going to be speaking this evening, Angel or Carrie or whom?
It's me.
Over to you. Okay, Angel.
Thank you very much. Not too much to report. DPAC receives $2,500 annual in our BC Gaming Grant Funds. With these funds, we are pleased to be able to offer parent caregiver information sessions. We are extremely pleased to be able to share that we have teamed up with the school district and will be co-hosting the following info sessions for parents, caregivers, and possibly SD staff. One is Safer Schools. It'll either happen on May 8th or May 9th. We're still waiting for some information on that. And we are working with Misha Oak from LGBTQ Corporate Training, and the date to be determined. We're hoping sometime in late May. Just waiting to hear back from him with some dates. We're also excited to share that this week SES and EOES are hosting the District Grade 6-7's volleyball tournament. March 12th, 13th is at my school, Oceanside, and March 14th at Springwood. So we're very excited. Huge shout out to SES PAC for organizing the fun activities that they have planned at Springwood and Oceanside for when the kids are not on the court. We're also pleased to announce that we are able to support Pete the Cat event this year. Extra big thank you to Jessica Threlful and the volunteers that she's been able to find to help DPAC have a table at this event. So we're grateful to her for that. A reminder that our DPAC meeting this week is canceled, and we will see everybody at the April 17th DPAC meeting. During the April 17th DPAC meeting, we will begin accepting DPAC President and Vice President executive nominations for the 2024-25 school year. Just a reminder to everyone that we hold the remaining executive positions for election in the year, in the fall of each year. So right now we're only electing the president and vice president. And we would like to take a moment to wish everyone a happy and healthy spring break. And we look forward to experiencing the April to June time warp slide with you.
Oh, that was well said. Abram to do.
So thank you.
Trustee Young? You're muted or something.
Nope, still muted.
Eileen, you were muted during the whole thing.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just checking on the meeting, but it means that I might be able to get to volleyball. Yay.
Yay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, thank you very much. Yeah. Now we'll move to information items, superintendent's report. Dr. Jory.
Okay, thank you, Chair Flynn. Get my notes up here. Hello, everyone. Squale, bonjour. Bonsoir is actually more accurate. It is evening now. Near enough, yes. I thought I would start off my updates with some greetings at the beginning rather than putting them at the end like I did last month. Here we are in the run into spring break, and all are enjoying the hubbub that we always seem to experience right before our holiday breaks. Lots of activity out there. Glad to hear about the volleyball tournaments going on, and I'll be popping by Springwood on Thursday to take a look. Last month, I talked a bit about student attendance. I described the scope of this issue in a global sense. I mentioned that we are in discussion with our schools about more unified and robust responses at the local level. This morning in our secondary breakout, we had a great discussion about thresholds for teacher contacts and admin letters, the addition of auto dialing, and how we will track our contact with parents and caregivers, and what positive and supportive communication looks like. Again, all these measures need to be in conjunction with our strategic plan and its strong emphasis on student success through building community and enhancing support structures. But we're getting very close to activation at both high schools and should be into these strategies slightly after our return from spring break. In the public meeting in February, President Matt Woods mentioned our ongoing response to adult absenteeism. It is absolutely true that our principals and managers are expected to meet with their staff when they see patterns of absences emerge that are not easily explained. They have the responsibility to ask if their employees are okay and to check in on them to see if they need some kind of support if they see evidence that suggests something might be wrong. This is part of being a good employer. It is also necessary to supervise staff from time to time to make sure there are not abuses or even just bad habits that start to inappropriately divert spending away from staffing and projects that support student success. Unfortunately, these habits do emerge from time to time, and they do add to costs and are certainly a factor in the significant budget impact we are seeing over time. And we think the best way to limit them is to start with some small measure of vigilance and respectful conversations. Let me share some charts with you that Secretary Treasurer Amos has created to show what absenteeism looks like over the last decade in the Qualicum School District. I'll just indulge me as I take a moment here to do this. And these aren't fancy by any means, but let me see here. Eve Flynn, I got you on my screen. Can you see these?
Yep. We can.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Let's go to the top one. That's mislabeled. It's a picture, so I couldn't edit it. Annual sick hours. It's actually days per FTE per year. So a 1.0 teacher on average takes these many days per year in the school district. All right, makes sense. On this column on the left, we see that number, and in 2011, 2012, we can see that was right around 7. Climbed to 8, dipped to 7, 7, 7, climbed back up to 8, dipped a little, remembering that was a short year. We were off for a section of time there. Then climbing, flattened for a little bit, and now is on pace to climb again. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that is a little bit concerning to us. That is part of the reason that our cost pressures have exceeded $1.2 million over the last 10 years. We'll switch over to CUPE now. Similar pattern, only this is generated by hours because they're paid by the hour. And you can see for a number of years, our CUPE members were 65 to 70, kind of bouncing around there, then up to 75, down again, probably because of the shorter year, and then up, 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 up. But then we see that it's kind of stabilizing a little bit, not down to pre-COVID times, but at least a little bit down, maybe trending in the right direction. We're not sure. Wouldn't want to show a chart like this without including management. Similar pattern. Remember, it's a much smaller working group. And so any long-term leaves will certainly have a disproportional impact. But back in 11-12, averaging 3 days per year off, down to almost 1, up to 2, bouncing along here, peaked at 5 in COVID times, and then down and then back up again. And so that's interesting. But here we are exploring the difference. 11 and a half days, 90 hours per member, and then for our management team, 5 sick days per person on average. Okay, so I'll just take this off now. Let me down. There we go. Right. So just want to point that out, recognizing that I all the way along I've been talking about this, and all the way along I've been supporting the change in culture that's to some degree is for the better. I do agree that a decade ago, workers in all categories probably toughed it out a little bit more than they should have, and probably should have been a little more cognizant of being contagious, being having those signs or symptoms, symptomatic, and coming to work anyway. And we're not encouraging people to do that by any means, but we do recognize too that the amount of absences seems to have outstripped what I would perceive to be a reasonable amount of absences, a reasonable change. And so we're just looking at this. It is our duty to do that. It's a responsibility that we have to the students, the taxpayer, and the organization. And I think it's important that we continue to do that and make sure that we are spending our money as wisely as we can. Switching topics here in a conversation that is connected very directly to student attendance, engagement, success, and equity, along with the transportation review and later start conversations, we are in a conversation with our secondary leadership regarding the alignment of our 2 secondary timetables. The proposal would have both schools be fully linear in grade 8 and grade 9. As of right now, one is and one is partially there, still semestered for grade 10s to 12. Okay, but with no A, B, C, D type of rolling tumble. It would be a static timetable. The advantages of the static and aligned timetables would be as follows. First of all, less confusing for students and adults challenged by executive function. And by that, we mean pretty much everybody. That old "what day is it" conversation, that can be an issue for people, especially if people coming in off leave or part-time and so on. Okay. Far easier to schedule with outside obligations and interests. And I'm talking right now about things that are not necessarily related to work. Students who are on sports teams or engaged in dance and such. Far easier to access partnerships such as WEX, trades, dual credit. And I can tell you right now, and this is frustrating, we actually are denying our students opportunities to participate in some of these types of relationships because of the rolling timetable. It's just impossible to schedule. And if it were fixed, this problem would be mitigated to a great degree, as well as the opportunity to move community expertise into our buildings. And I'll give a specific example. Our district principal of Indigenous Education is working on having a carver come in to make a canoe. This is something that she'd like to pursue, and I think she's got some interest out there. But having a rolling timetable makes this extremely hard. Let's imagine they're working with a group of students in an art class. Well, when is that art class? Well, on Monday it's on this day and at this time, and on Tuesday it's at this time, and then on Thursday it's on this time, and then Wednesday, and so on and so on. And honestly, it's actually a little bit disrespectful to ask somebody to do that. A static timetable would greatly help with these types of partnerships. It's far easier in a static timetable to access actual work opportunities outside of school through semester-long, later start, or earlier end. And I'll give an example maybe of a student in grade 12 being able to leave the school at 1:30 and go to a job at a restaurant and be able to hold that job and earn money for university or just to pay rent and food. Conversely, a student in grade 12, for example, could work at a gas station, close that gas station down at 12 o'clock, sleep in a little bit, come to second period, not having an enrolling first period class. Once again, this is an opportunity that a rolling timetable doesn't allow us to do without them missing school. So think back to the attendance conversations. If we create a schedule that is more flexible and more accessible for our kids, we can also cut down on the number of times they have to miss classes just because what we've done is not working for them. And finally, this would make it possible to have students cross-enroll and access specialty programs across the district on a temporary basis. Imagine a student at Bolinas. That's their home school. That's their peer group. This is where they've been for their entire career, but they recognize that there's something over at KSS that they want to take, maybe a fine arts class, a play or something. Well, if we have the same timetable, similar bells, a student could drive across town and be a part of a program like that. We could cross-enroll them and make that possible in a way that it's just not now. And by the way, all these advantages that I've listed apply to staff as well. We've been talking a fair amount lately about how the tumbles limit part-time jobs and TTOC assignments and generally cause confusion. I had a brief conversation this morning for our call-out folks, and I said, is this, if we actually have static timetables at the secondary schools, would this help us with call it? Would it help put jobs together? And the answer was, well, absolutely, yes, it would. I've also worked in all manner of timetables myself, and I can say that in the 2 schools where there was no tumble, no one ever talked about it as a solution for anything. It was not missed in one bit. It was gone, and the static really became the flavor of the day, and everyone carried on. Now, timetable builder training for PVP teams has started. Wanted to build their acumen to have the most out of that engine and the system. I think we've been underutilizing. I think it will help with that hybrid model. Conversations with staff at the 2 schools have begun. Conversations with our amazing student voice groups are next. And apparently I am invited to discuss this matter at both schools and look very much forward to availing myself to what will probably be a quite spirited conversation. In other news, it was my pleasure to attend the VISTA conference we hosted. We, VISTA, meaning Vancouver Island School Trustees Association, we being the Qualicum School District. This recent weekend, kudos to our board for pulling off what at least appeared to be a seamless event. You never know what's going on in the background. I was unaware of any problems. It looked very smooth to me. The room was well selected, the food was great, the gifts were thoughtful, and the presenters were amazing. The presenters were amazing. I'll just say that with such humility. Having a significant student presence was especially effective, and certainly between the students from Vancouver Island North and our own students from KSS and Bolinas, the tone was set for a great conversation about supporting student success across the entire island. Thank you to all staff who contributed, especially our exec assistant, Karen Hurt, who undoubtedly did the lion's share. Well done, Qualicum School District, best VISTA ever, according to many of the participants, I'm sure. One other piece I just want to mention here, and this is one of the reasons we moved this, up in front of that conversation that we're going to have regarding the 10 minutes. And that is about our 3 schools and the 5-minute shift upcoming. I'll start by apologizing to our board for any grief they've taken in regard to this. They've received some letters and some context and such about the timeline of it, or the lack of communication, or just generally wondering what we're up to. And I want to take all responsibility for that and say this is entirely an operational decision. It is not them, this 5 minutes. This is me doing this, and I'll tell you what it's about. We have this other conversation going on, and yes, they're connected. But during my work with the transportation department, talking about the possibilities, talking about what we could and could not do next year and beyond, they raised the issue of our schools getting out of sync with the bus schedule. Now, the bus schedule is very complicated, and it is the same in every school district. It is what essentially drives the bell schedule. And what had happened is 3 of our schools made decisions to adjust their bell times without the full approval or understanding of the transportation team. The upshot of this is we have a series of connections that are now not quite aligned, and then we have students undersupervised or unsupervised across the district through these gaps. And it's not just that the students may be, let off and not picked up or whatever. It's not that, and I don't want to speak too specifically about it because I don't want to misspeak. But the message from the transportation department was one of frustration in that this additional supervision was falling onto the bus drivers, and it was an issue for them, and we're trying to provide some relief from that. Okay. More specifically, though, there are a large group of students that are dropped off at Bolinas. The bus driver tries to stay there as long as possible, tries to supervise them, and then has to go when they are there out on the front. And it's always been that way, as far as I know, many years. But because of a recent change at Bolinas to accommodate the semester changeover day, that time had been extended. And in my opinion, it's problematic. And so this was an opportunity for us to change it. What I did is I said, okay, to the transportation department, leave this with me. I'll go check in with the principals. I talked to the principals and said, okay, how did this happen? And they told me their stories, and they're all good ones, right? But the gap, of course, is that all this stuff should come back to the central table. We should be conferring with the transportation department. We should get a clear view into what the ramifications are. And we didn't do that. It's not part of our practice. I could tell you it will be in the future after we do our full bus review and we develop, I think, a transportation handbook is really the way to go about this. Anyway, it happened for however it did. And it's my opinion now that it needs to unhappen and apologize for the timeline. The principals did know some weeks ago. I asked them can you do this? Can you do this? And they said, well, yes. What will the impact be like? And we said, well, I think we can manage. Can you communicate this right away? And so they told me they would through their newsletter. And then the very next PAC meeting, of course, they would talk about it. And I brought it up at the board meeting, which was 2 weeks ago, and said, okay, after spring break, that gives us a little bit of time to adjust. Ultimately, it is 5 minutes. In the case of the 2 elementary schools, it's just a rotation. In the case of Bolinas, it's 5 minutes later, same at the end, and that time comes out of lunch. And so their lunch will go from 53 to 48 minutes. And actually, that's just less supervision time for their principals there. So mea culpa. This is on myself. Everybody that's involved in this process is under my supervision, and so just want to take that on and say if it causes any kind of inconvenience, upset, or consternation out there, I apologize for that too. And but this is what's going on. We're going to take some pressure off our bus drivers and make sure that our students are supervised as much as they possibly can be. Also, I think one of the ways to take a little bit of pressure off this, if this is a day end kind of concern, like you've got something that you absolutely have to be at 3 o'clock or whatever it is, having your student pop out of class a few minutes early, I think is one way to get at that. We can certainly make sure that that's a possibility for everybody out there, given the circumstances. So that's that story in a nutshell. I think, conflate these two things a little bit because I referred to this as an incremental shift. And probably shouldn't have done that because I think what that did is it caused people to put these ideas together and put them both on the board, and that was a mistake on my part to do that. So just for clarity's sake, these 3 schools, 5 minutes, making a correction on me. The 10-minute conversation is a separate conversation, which we'll endeavor to have in a moment. Any questions from my board on this?
I have trustee Young and I did have trustee Kurland, but his hand's gone down now. Trustee Young.
Yeah, back to static timetable. I've heard of a lot of timetables in my time, but static, I have not heard about. So are you talking about like, you know, the same first period every day? If it's socials, it'll be the same. And then, you know, if second period was English, it's going to be English every day, second period. Tell
Yeah.
me about this.
Yeah, that's basically it. And if you're in a linear timetable, you're in 8 and 9, you would alternate days like this, right? It would be A, B. But what it also allows you to do is schedule humanities first period. And then ideally, and we'll see if we can pull this off, a student would go to the same teacher and they'd be doing
Right.
cross-curricular work in both of those. Maybe they could do math and science in period 2 and so on. The other thing I would say about this, and I've been in 2 schools where we had fixed timetables. So, you know, a high school 8 to 12, we did a semester for, 5 months, and then the second semester for 5 months, no rolling. And I was in a 6 to 12 middle school, which had a middle school day calendar, right? So it was the same classes every day in the same order, and their electives were at the end of the day, they're exploratory. And the high school part was 9 to 12 and semesterized and fixed. And so, yeah, same order, allows you to plan, schedule, make sure you put things, do your best anyway to put things where they're a good fit. PE at the end of the day, middle school age learning, your core courses in the morning if possible, that type of thing.
Thank you.
Trustee Austin.
Thanks for all that, Peter. So just to be very clear, this proposed this 5-minute shift coming after spring break to just the 3 schools, that is a correction. From what I understand what you said, over the last few years, these 3 schools have independently shifted their bell schedule, but that did not they did not consult the transportation department. So now there's sort of an imbalance between the bell schedule and the bus schedule. So from what I understand, this is simply a correction back to the schedule that the transportation department has always had and has been a little bit and has been a little bit upset, which if they're going into a transportation study and plan in the fall, one would think you want everything on paper, everything that's on paper, you want to be happening out in the field. So am I right there? Am I getting that?
Yeah, well, that is my assumption. That is my understanding. In some cases, it was a recent change, I think. In some cases, it might be a year or 2, but that is exactly my understanding. Is those are actually previous times.
Right. So this is simply a correction back to what the operations department has been operating on.
Yes. Right. The assumptions that built the original bus schedule that is in play right now. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Young.
Yeah, just I guess it's a point of information. There's a question and answer from somebody named Celine Griffin. Will there be a Q&A at the end? And it's actually item number 20, public question period.
The floor is open to the floor is open to the public for questions on any of the agenda items as presented this evening. So yes, you'll have an opportunity at the end. Thank you for reading that, Trustee Young. I missed the chat box tonight.
If there are no further questions on this particular matter, I'll just close by saying Director Terpstra and Associate Superintendent Wilson will update you on professional learning and other happenings around the district, at least since we gathered 2 weeks ago. I want to close by thanking all staff for their hard work this March in providing amazing and vibrant learning environments in our schools, whether you change spark plugs, rotate tires, empty recycling, whack weeds, run payroll or lead, design, facilitate, assess, or support learning in any way. We appreciate your efforts very much. And please enjoy your well-deserved spring break if you are able to have one. Acceptco, everyone. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Dr. Jory. So over to the tag team of Associate Superintendent Wilson and Director's Instruction, Mr. Terpstra. Don't know who's going first this time.
Yeah, good
Director of Instruction,
evening,
Terpstra
everyone.
went last time first.
Good evening, everyone. I have just one thing to share this evening, but it's a report. It is on page 14 of the agenda if you want to follow along. Really, this is just a report that I submitted. Both the assessment committee and the CEAC committee have received copies of that. And we also didn't have an ed committee this month. So I thought I'd put this to the board. And so it's really just a summary of the district-wide assessments. As you know, we've been working on this for a few years. This year, I'm happy to say we had the following assessments across all of our grades in all of our schools. The kindergarten snapshot, again, was done with every single one of our K classes and K students. Something that we're really proud of, and also the team was able to present to Vista on Friday evening. Grade 3 and 5 students received district-wide rights. Grade 6 and 8 students did an island numeracy assessment. And then grade 9s for the first time this year did a literacy assessment where we looked at their comprehend and their connection skills. As everyone knows and has heard before at this meeting, these are interspersed between the provincial assessments, the FSA, and the grad assessments at grade 10 to 12. We enter these results into EdPlan Insight, and there's a picture of what a heat map would look like for a class, that typical class. This one's a blended 6-7 class, so you can see the first section of it is really the students' first term proficiency skill learning update scores. And then you can see the grade 6s have the numeracy assessment, and then the grade 7s have their FSA numeracy and literacy scores in there. Really what's powerful about all of this is that a teacher at a glance can really just look at their students and look for really anomalies in their class, or also students that maybe need a little second look at this stage. And so those are there for teachers. The other powerful piece of this is all of this data is available to next year's teachers by the end of September. So this data travels with the students, and once the classes are reorganized in September, teacher will be able to see all of last year's data for their students in that current year. The second page is really a summary, because we get asked a lot, well, why are you doing all these assessments? And all of the district-wide assessments, they provide information, most importantly to the classroom teacher, but secondly to the school, so that they can focus their school-wide strategy initiatives, and then to the district only as we gather all the teachers who do these assessments together. We look through the results and then also see, okay, what are the strengths, but what are the areas of focus? And then we can develop our Pro-D events and learning around what we need to target. So you can see from the kindergarten snapshot, and again, students who are identified get a second look in the spring. Actions coming out of that included new furniture that we purchased for a couple of classrooms in Bowser, hallway pass for their physical literacy, resources, and continued learning. And also to note, and this has been a practice that's gone on for years in our district, is that our kindergarten teachers do gather together each year 2 or 3 times. The district-wide rights at grade 3 and 5. Next steps include making available pre-writing activities and graphics, teaching mechanics of writing, teaching vocabulary and connections, and making it clear what proficient writing. The Ministry of Education has really looked at having a definition through its curriculum of what it looks like to be a proficient writer, reader, and also in numeracy at each of the grade levels all the way across the board. Learning events include our new NRT. We have lots of those focused on both reading and writing. District resources through the DRC, learning grants, and collaboration time. Also, Matt purchased last year Adrian Gear's Powerful Writing Structures webinar, something that's been used in many of our school Pro D days and even district Pro D days, including this last recent one. Numeracy assessments at grades 6 and 8. Again, we brought that team together. Many routines that are working were shared, like vertical surfaces and other resources. Trends included supporting math language and number sense along with estimation. Teachers are also looking for resources to support students. And again, number of numeracy initiatives throughout the district supported by learning grants, teaching and learning team, and again, our NRTs. The district's also just engaged conversation with Carol Fullerton, who's worked in our district before, particularly with Nanus Elementary. And we're going to host 2 targeted sessions, one sort of at grade 4-5, where we introduce multiplication and division, and then also grades 6 through 8 teachers, where we're focusing on problem solving, and of course, the accessible fractions that everyone struggles with at times in their math careers. And then lastly, literacy assessment. Again, that team came in, we went through, talked about connections, how getting kids. This one was super interesting though, is that both the articles in this assessment were environmental issues. One was on oceans and one was on light pollution. And our kids are so well versed on these topics that they didn't read the articles well enough to respond to them, because they were responding to the knowledge that they already know about these pretty common topics for them, which is a good thing. We're doing a great job in teaching our kids about the environment, but it didn't help us necessarily assess their reading skills and their connection ability. So that's the great conversation we have with the teachers. And then so now we're obviously going to look for some different articles for this assessment particularly. And just our last month, I presented on the learning rounds that we hosted here, and we've been doing that. We still have a 3rd session in April with all of our grade 9 teachers in the 2 high schools. And that is the summary report.
Thank you, Mr. Terpstra. Any questions of our Director of Instruction? Seeing none, Associate Superintendent Wilson to wrap.
Just a couple things from me as well. One of the things I mentioned at DPAC was a program called Preventure, which is a drug and alcohol harm reduction program. We've now had 2 of our staff be fully trained in that particular program, and that was done through the Island Health grant that we got to be able to support that. Next year, our hope is that we become part of the virtual foundry process of Preventure, where they train all of our staff, from the facilitators of the program to the counselors and coaches, and guide us through it. If we are selected as a district to be part of that, we would target our grade 8s, and our grade 8s would do a quick assessment to see whether that's something that they are part of. And then there's groups that's selected based on your personality type or tendency, I prefer to say. If you're somebody who's more of a risk taker, you might be learning these strategies. If you're somebody who's more reserved or quiet or more introverted, you learn different strategies. And it is all about harm reduction. I wonder which one some of us might be in as we start to giggle and laugh around that. But we are excited to be part of it. Virtual Foundry did an amazing presentation to our secondary school counselors and principals and vice principals. And so we did have support from them around how we will do it. It's going to be a lot of work for us the first year, because it is a learning curve for us. And that's where they guide and shepherd us, because they've done this in other districts, and so looking forward to be part of them. Registration and enrollment is still going on, and that's connected to the staffing and how we allocate staffing in our schools. Also working on 2 initiatives that I know have been mentioned at DPAC. One is the Playful Pathways, which is part of our Ready, Set, Learn program, alongside our involvement with Pete the Cat, and then our Welcome to Kindergarten sessions that usually happen in May. The Playful Pathways is an opportunity to have some kind of preschool activity at each one of our elementary schools that will likely take place in the library, and so stay tuned for the flyer coming out after the break. And we're sending out information after the break to all of our pre-registered kindergarten students for next year who might show an expression of interest in being part of the pre-K transition program that we did last year and piloted at Irvington and Nanoose Bay Elementary. School reviews are part of our work that we do in February and into March before the break. And when I say we, I want to acknowledge the work that Tandy Gunn does with this, our district principal for learning. Her responsibility is learning support. Alongside our school teams, the reviews are always a highlight of my year, and where we get to sit down with the school teams for a couple of hours and talk about where cohorts are at, what individual cohorts' needs might be, as well as individual students. Who are students that need that supplemental support? What kind of support does that look like? What's the progress of the student? So it's not just having conversations around the needs for next year, but how is a student met some of their IEP goals, work towards their learning this year. Schools are always well prepared. It comes from the conversations with the learning support team, conversations with the classroom teachers around the class reviews, and then comes to a school review. And Tandy and I then work together to look what our district looks like. We have piloted a new form this year. We begged it, borrowed it, or absorbed it from another district, and we're tweaking it already based on some feedback that we've got from schools. And it's going to align to like the heat map that you just saw Mr. Terpster show, looking at our children that have needs in other ways. So we are looking forward to that. Alongside the school reviews, we are getting information from our schools around how we're supporting professional learning with our teaching staff, as well as our support staff, and what some of the areas of growth that are still needed in the schools, and how does that align to their school plans, and what are they doing with the NERTs that you're hearing? It is NRT. You're hearing us say it's not nerds. I know that some of us teachers can be a bit nerdy, but this is NERT. And so it's great to see what schools are doing that's connected to the needs of students, connected to their school planning and what we're doing around that. Attendance has been mentioned by our superintendent, and 2 conversations that we had both at the elementary levels meeting and the secondary levels meeting today is how could we support attendance for our students as well? It starts early, and when do we start to make sure that we have influence over some patterns? When we get to secondary school, if the pattern to say, I don't want to go to school today is entrenched, it's often harder to get them back re-engaged in school. So good conversations at both elementary and secondary with some thoughts and supports in which how do we contact families, how do we make connections to families, how do we support families if really their child is truly anxious about going to school, how do we get to the root cause of that anxiousness and how do we best support that so that we do get engagement back in the schools. And I think that's it. Again, I wish everybody a happy and safe and enjoyable spring break and filling buckets. We're also mindful that for some students, 2 weeks away from school is a long time. And we do a lot of support to support some of our more vulnerable families. I want to acknowledge the work because it's going out tomorrow. We have 80 of our families, that's 80 families on our backpack program. And that is supported by Sheila's taken the lead on that, Sheila Morrison, and certainly our community volunteers that are part of that particular program. So for schools, sometimes it is their safe place for a variety of different reasons. We know houses and homes are not always the same for every child. And so I do want to acknowledge that it can be a stressful time for kiddos as well. Thank you.
Any questions, trustees? Thank you both for the, what only seems 2 weeks worth of initiatives. It was a full presentation. Thank you. So we'll return to the agenda order of 11A action items, bell time shifts for September 24. I will digress from sort of normal Robert's Rules of Order and ask Dr. Jory to speak to the background and information contained in this motion, and then we'll ask the board to entertain the motion and go from there. But some preamble, backgrounder type context from Dr. Jory, I think we'd all appreciate. So over to you, Dr. Jory.
Well, thank you, Chair Flynn. And to Madam President Woods's point, yeah, there is no briefing note on this. And I will say that's unusual. And yeah, I think I, in hindsight, should have produced one, not so much to have our Madam President rebut, but to give some more concise notes for our board and summarize the conversations that have taken place so far. And there have been a number of conversations. If we go back to the initial concept being launched in the fall, we had conversations in November, December, January, February, both in public and in our side chat meetings that we have monthly. Lots of communications online, and I also point out that the impetus for this was mapped out on the website that that launched the surveys back in December, and you know, for people who are questioning this at this particular point, for us to provide them access back to it's still there. I mean, we could certainly link it back to them and say this is why it was brought to the board's attention. Now, in that particular survey, I mean, remember, we got 2,000 responses from across the school district on the question of 30 minutes. And I was being intentionally provocative on that. I wanted to see what kind of responses we would get from a more substantial approach to this. And we got a mixed bag, not surprisingly. And if you had access to that information, as the board does, and they've seen all 2,000 responses, is you would see that schools that were earlier, generally there was more support, and schools that were later, generally there was less support. No surprise there. The intention here really isn't to get at the issue so much at the schools that are already starting fairly close to 9 o'clock. The issue was to in the manner of improved equity and improved outcomes, get at this issue as much as possible from the schools that are starting earliest. The 10 after 9 schools are high schools that start, in my opinion, a little bit too early for high school. And so our hope was to do something a little more specific and grand, but unfortunately, despite the fact we have purchased this routing software, we're not ready to do something that can get at the problem in a specific way, leave the later schools alone entirely and address the needs of the earlier schools. We can't do it yet. We're not ready. There are a couple of things we need to do first, besides just mastering the program. One is to get a handle on our ridership. And for those in attendance in the February meeting, you see that that was one of the intentions of the new $25 registration fee. We need to make sure that we have an accurate count of riders as much as we possibly can, so that we can have that information in the software and get at this more accurately. The swipe card system hooked to the app is also important for that. The full review of the busing system, what our routing looks like, what kinds of additional layers have been added on over the years, you know, what kinds of rules and standards and expectations around this. I think also a transportation committee, which would be the ones that vetted potential change requests, as opposed to just leaving that up to the transportation department. All of these in a AP, or I would say handbook, are ultimately what's going to come out of that review. In the meantime, though, I did not want to walk away entirely from this issue in our earlier schools, having gone through this process and say, no, we're just not going to do anything, or I'm not going to take anything to the board, didn't feel right to me. So looking at the start times, recognizing that around 9 o'clock in my mind is still a reasonable time. You may disagree, but feel like that's sort of okay. 5 to 9, a few minutes after 9 is something that I think our later start schools can manage to provide just a little bit of relief to our ones that start earlier. That's the intention here. And to answer some of those questions that were raised by Mr. Woods, no, we're not talking up to 10 minutes. We're talking exactly 10 minutes. 10 minutes rolls. Okay. Whatever the start time is, add 10. Whatever the end time is, add 10. The idea around lunch hours wasn't part of my original design intention. That was something that you brought to me. Is it okay if we had this conversation at the school level? And okay, absolutely, should always agree to consult when it's appropriate to do so. And those consultations in the short term might be appropriate. They might not lead to anything, but in the long term, after we've done the full review, they might really bear some fruit at that particular time. So don't want to say no now, just want to say, well, let's be cautious about our expectations and then talk about lunch hour more fulsomely when we have the full review in the fall. So that's a fairly long-winded explanation. If I put that all in a briefing note, it wouldn't be that brief. So there it is. I think I've summarized the story from beginning to end. And I do know this, despite we haven't had any kind of debate, the trustees have been quite quiet about this. I think they all have a very different perspective, and now's the chance for them to share those perspectives and for us to see if this moves forward. What I'll say is there are multiple options here. They could approve it, they could deny it, they could kick it down the road, so to speak. Pardon the pun. But whatever happens, I can tell you that I'm not going to let go of this entirely. It will come back again, maybe sooner, maybe later, but it is something that I think that we need to address across the district, and I will be reminding them of this from time to time if it doesn't go now. And I'll, with that, pause and let the chair take over the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Jory. Trustees, we have a motion before us this evening that the Board of Education, School District 9, support a 10-minute shift to later bell times across the district effective September 2024. I shall move this so that it can be on the table for discussion. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Trustee Austin. Over to trustees to pose questions, entertain your ideas, and where we can go from there toward a summary. No, not sure that we're going to get consensus. Trustee Austin.
Okay, again, thank you, Peter, for that explanation. Right off the top, I want to say, I tend to agree with Peter on this. I would like to see the later start times. I have a particular concern with some of our schools in our district that start early. Some of our kids are out on the road waiting for buses at 7 in the morning, which is very, very dark in the winter time. So beyond some of the studies and research that's been done in terms of how well kids do in school, there's safety issues for me. So I'm glad that Peter won't let this rest, because I do think it deserves the conversation, and I really would like to see it move forward. However, having said all that, I'm of the mind that I would like to see it wait until we've had the transportation review, because I feel like these really go hand in hand. There is the educational component, but it's kind of dependent also on our transportation. And then perhaps it might, and then after we've had our transportation review, I don't know, perhaps there's the opportunity to look at the schools a little more individually. Instead, it may not hopefully be a district-wide shift. Perhaps we can look at shifting those really early morning schools quite a bit later, like the half an hour or 20 minutes, and maybe look at one of those ones that already start a little later, maybe not shift them as much. I don't know. And that's one of the reasons I won't be voting in favor of this motion, because I don't know, and I am looking for the answers. And I think some of the answers will be coming out of that transportation review. And it'll also give us more opportunity to address some of the concerns that are coming forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Austin. Trustee Kurland.
So I did some of my own independent research and picked a school district that didn't have the daylight times that we do, that problem, because it's just a variable. And the statistics that have come out of having a later start time are amazing for the benefit of the students, and which is what it's all about. I mean, incredible things like 70% less traffic accidents for kids driving to school, you know, things like that. It's pretty clear that the evidence, the data suggests that this is a good thing to do. And I'm sure that's why Dr. Jory is contemplating it. My concern, or not concern, but my question is, you know, after, let's say we do this, then obviously we're going to have some way of collecting data to see if it's made any difference. And I don't know if we have plans to do that. We're still talking about doing this in the first place. So, you know, I intend to support this, and you know, I think that the overall change is going to be for the benefit of the kids, and that's what I'm concerned about.
Thank you, Trustee Kurland. Trustee Young.
Oh, I
Oh,
think
sorry,
Trustee
sorry, Trustee Kellogg. I
Kellogg
thought that was
first.
a 4. Trustee Kellogg.
So I want to say thank you, Peter, for clarifying the thing about April that trustees had no input on the 5-minute change. I appreciated that. But I right from the get-go, when this was brought forward, I felt that it may end up being good for the kids, that they get an extra 10 minutes sleep. And I know that there's scientific evidence that supports that, but I also feel, because I was a parent and I had kids and I had restraints to get them to school and get myself to work, that if we're making changes and families don't have enough time to figure things out because there's not been given enough information, and I don't feel that there has been, that if it's not good for the families in our district, then that's not good for the kids either. So for myself, I also will not be voting for this change.
Thank you, Trustee Kellogg. Trustee Young.
I agree with a lot of what's been stated. The educational safety issue that Trustee Austin talked about, the outside data that Trustee Kurland talked about. I focused actually on the survey data, and one of the things, Dr. Jory, that you have talked about a lot is your favorite slide around, you know, informing and involving and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if you want to find that slide, but it might be good for people to understand where we are on that slide, you know, and where we are in terms of that governance data. What I focused on, I have to say, Dr. Jory gave us a weekend or so to look through 2,000 or more survey results. Lots and lots. And what I focused on, because our role as trustees is to support students, primarily to support students. So I focused on the student surveys, and the student survey data was more or less supportive. And the focus groups, the groups that then the leadership groups in the high schools that Dr. Jory spoke with, their information, they were even more supportive. So I would really, really like to see us consider this. I also agree that maybe it's a little early in the game. And I also, if trustees are really, really wanting to support students, I don't think 10 minutes makes much difference. I'd like to go for a half an hour. I'd like to not do the compromise. Let's just go all the way. And perhaps what we need to do is to postpone this decision to a time after the traffic review, transportation review or whatever. But if we have to vote on this now, I have to say, I have a problem with Robert's Rules of Order because I can't vote in favor and I don't want to oppose it. So I'm going to abstain. If this were consensus, I would be stepping aside from the decision and the vote would not be counted, whereas in Robert's Rules of Order, it will go as possibly a negative vote. So that's where I stand with all of this. Let's postpone it.
Motion to postpone usually requires a time to bring it back to the table. Identify, I believe I rely heavily with Mr. Amos for counsel on Robert's rules. I think my sense is what the transportation review will take in consideration of Trustee Austin's comment is I think it's a longitudinal study and work that would be over a year. So that would, to put it after that, puts us in 2026. So I think my thinking at this point is more communication, and in the diagram that Dr. Jory does present to us in numerous occasions about how to get people along the continuum. The frustration I think I've heard to this point is there has not been maybe enough communication with some definitive parameters. If we're trying to get it, and at a school that starts early in the morning, I've represented it as a PAC chair, had this art on the table of the start time of the school, which is 10 after 8, just being so early in the morning. So any adjustments, and I think where some thinking possibly can go in a month or 2 months time would be, what does each school look like at 10 minutes? Or does it have to be all across the board type change for folks? You don't really maybe want to adjust the high schools yet. And my concern is that we don't throw away the ability, and maybe Dr. Jory, you can clarify a little further. This motion doesn't read that it read to a specific school. It looks at the district as a whole, and that maybe this might be 1 or 2 schools this September, not all schools this September. And so I'm wondering if we were to postpone this motion to have further information gathered on what this 10 minutes might be able to do in the first round, what it would look like. Bell starts, and some of the commentary we've had, yes, we've had people that jump to the whole notion that lunch is going to be reduced and things like that. And that was not anything that I contemplated was going to be part of it. So I'm not waffling, but I think given the end of a transportation review will take us out to 2026, and that we will not see any adjustments that would be near to any attempt to get to the safety factor or to our early school starts, and to understand more of what this fills out to look like on 10 minutes, based on 10 minutes. It may adjust itself wider to the notion that Trustee Young has brought, that it should be half an hour. And that might tip a few people right off the edge of this conversation. But to understand a little more of the impact, each site by site, beginning bell, recess, lunch, and things like that, some of the sort of the particulars that we deal with. But this also too is an operational issue that I don't really perceive it as being governance, although yes, student first is what we like to keep in our lens and focus of what we're doing. So if it's the betterment of students, then that's where we land. But this is operational, and but it digresses a bit into governance as well in some respect. But I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Jory, for a couple of maybe fleshing out.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Flynn. Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, the 10 minutes is a compromise, noting that we couldn't get at this specifically this year. We're just not ready to maximize the software. We just don't have a clear view into ridership. We're going to need more time to do that. And the compromise was to give some relief to our high school kids. And by the way, the focus groups at the high schools both said, yes, absolutely, 10 more minutes would be greatly appreciated. I also, through IAC, got some information back from one of our Indigenous communities who said, we don't do surveys, but yes, 10 more minutes would be appreciated. But I also understand, the complexity of this issue, and that our intention, was not to move the late times even later. What we would be doing in essence, if we rotated everything 10 minutes, is we're asking our late schools to be 10 minutes later and inconvenience them to a point where like they're not really benefiting. It is kind of a sacrifice so that we can make our 2 early schools and our 2 high schools a little bit later and give them the relief that they would like or need. So there's a trade-off here. And I understand that's not ideal. It's a compromise. That's what a compromise is. Given all that, the transportation review is not going to be wrapped up in a month or 2. It's bigger than that. This is something that will start in October and probably won't conclude until December or January. And so this motion, this type of motion, this idea will be coming back in the February or March of next year. I'm okay with that. I understand what's going on here, and I'm fine with it. But it is a little bit sad in my mind if this does not advance, that we were unable to give relief to our 2 earliest schools and our 2 high schools at this time. That was something I was hopeful for.
Thank you, Dr. Tory. That's helpful. So that's 4 schools anticipated at this point, maybe. Flexibility is needed, I know, because busing is huge. Trustee Young.
Yeah, motion to postpone indefinitely from Robert's Rules of Order, Section 11, and it goes on through subsection 8. Is a motion that the Assembly decline to take a position on the main question. Its adoption kills the main motion for the duration of the session and avoids a direct vote on the question. It is useful in disposing of a badly chosen main motion that cannot be adopted or expressly rejected without possibly undesirable consequences. Okay, it goes on. I don't have to go on. It's also referred to in the tables under T22, and it is a motion to postpone indefinitely. It requires a seconder. It is debatable. And it is not amendable.
My motion was not indefinitely, it was to defer for a specified date. I'm just deferring in a specified date. Trustee Austin.
Peter, what would this do if we were to postpone this motion until the May board meeting? Just, and see if we can help address some of those concerns and questions that are out there. Would that is that really problematic in terms of the transportation department, or?
We're not going to get anywhere with the actual routing by then. I mean, we need to do the full review. We need to have the pass cards in motion. We need to have the fees in motion. All that stuff has to happen before we get anywhere with that. It would allow us time to communicate more, which is never a bad thing. But what I would suspect is it's not really going to change the minds of people who don't want to do it. It may clear up some of the questions, but it won't necessarily make it palatable for those that are opposed, especially those that are opposed in our later schools. So May's not helpful for at this particular juncture, I don't think. What I would say, though, given the conversation that we have, is rather than delay it, might be better just to vote it down, and then expect that I will bring it back in the fall, and then at that particular time have the board say, okay, we're serious now. Here's some information that we want to see before we give this the big thumbs up.
Thanks, Dr. Jory. Trustee Austin, I think you had the floor a couple times. I'd like to go to Mr. Amos, and I can come back to you again. That's okay? Okay.
No, I didn't have a question. I just kept my hand up, so sorry.
Oh, okay, no, fair enough. Secretary Treasurer Amos.
Elaine and I sometimes compete for the Robert's Rules of Order.
Rules of Order book?
I was just going to weigh in on the same thing, that a postponement kick it down for another session. We don't open and close our session, so by definition, if you
Yeah.
were to postpone it, it would just probably come up it would give you the option to bring it up in April if that's the appetite of the board. That's about it.
Actually, there's no
I'm-
motion to defer in here. It's
Well,
a
we're-
motion to postpone to a certain time, right?
I didn't say defer.
Yeah, no,
So
Eve did.
I like
So-
Peter's
so-
suggestion.
so
Vote
I
on
like
it.
Peter's
Okay, hold
suggestion.
on. Secretary Treasurer Amos has the floor. Thank you. Respectfully.
yes, so again, I will just leave it to the chair to act on in the interest of the board hearing the debate.
Thank you for double checking the double checking.
That's diplomacy.
Thank you. Yes, I hear a thread. I believe I hear a thread. And so what, if with the indulgence of the board at this time, I'll call a question on the motion that is on the floor. I think I don't need to read it again. I think people are quite astutely aware of it. All in favor? Trustee Kurland, myself, it would be included that. Contrary minded, voting against?
Oh, shoot.
Elaine, you love this stuff.
Yeah, I know.
And
Does Peter
abstaining?
get a vote?
Okay, that's 2 for, 2 against, and 1 abstention, so it's a hung jury, so someone's gonna have to go to the book, but
It's defeated if it's a
This
I
is
tie.
think
defeated.
it's
yes,
it's
I
defeated,
take,
yes.
yes, it's defeated by circumstance, yes. Okay, onward to our next item B of action items is a motion regarding our capital, which we sort of got some really good news. The Board of Education School District 69 approved the addition of a 2024-25 CNCP request for an HVAC project at Ballina Secondary School in the amount of $282,000. I'll call on Mr. Amos to explain this windfall.
Do you want to raise the, I can speak to it once it's on the table.
Sorry, seconder. My apologies. Seconder, please, to the motion. Thank you, Trustee Young. And Mr. Amos.
So
This is a
absolutely.
good news story. Yeah.
It's so if you recall, we have our minor capital submission go in September on the 24-25 capital year. And normally what would end up happening in the next week in March 15th, maybe by the end of the week or the beginning of the next week, we will learn the results of that submission. And it is positive in the sense of we've gotten some good information in terms of which projects will go forward for approval. But we're waiting for the ministry to announce that. And so in the next week, we will hear which of those 24-25 projects are supported and will go forward. This is about an added or an addition to that submission in context to what we were able to share with the ministry last week. So last week we reached out to in conversations with the director of operations with our regional planning officer. He was explaining the situation that we had at that Bolinas' HVAC in terms of the cost escalations due to the engineering costs, the structural engineering costs associated with the weight of the HVAC units. And so the difficulty that we were having closing this project up was a two-parter, a two-phaser. So he was sort of had the conversation with the regional manager that indicated that we were our budget is overblown. It's going to eat into some other of our local capital. And it was upon sort of that inquiry that they said, well, why don't you ask for a special consideration? And so that special consideration is what's before you in terms of they always hold back some funding with this announcement that's going to come in the next week. They always hold back some funding for some contingencies for exactly this purpose of the wonders of cost escalations based on that basically 18 months of planning between planning it and doing it. So it was receptive. We were able to get a letter into them on Thursday. We heard from them on Friday that said, yes, submit it, get your board resolution prepared. When the new proposals come or the new submissions gets opened as of April 1st, then we'll be ready to go. So this is all about absolutely a good news story is that we're being supported on $285 or $82,000 escalations on a project that they're willing to support with this resolution. We'll put it in for April through the MICAPs. And then what'll end up happening is whatever letter that we get in the next two weeks will be revised with this project come April once it's submitted and appropriately approved by the ministry. So yes, it will be a good news. We just sort of have to work through some of the not necessarily bureaucratic work, but anyways, work through the procedures. Absolutely.
Yep.
So that's the basis of this request.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amos. Are there any questions, trustees? Seeing no hands, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Hands. Thank you very much. This carried. No Finance and Operations Committee of the Whole report or a Policy Committee of the Whole or Education Committee of the Whole, but reminders that the next meeting for Finance and Operations will be April 15th. Policy April 15th in the afternoon, and Education Committee April 16th as per our practice. No reports from outside organizations. Vancouver Island's Trustees Association Spring Conference has been alluded to by a couple of our senior staff, was held this past weekend at the Bayside. We were the hosts. We had 75 participants, trustees, senior secretary treasurers and superintendents, and from all within Vancouver Island. We are just Vancouver Island based, and it really was a lot of fun. And we shared kind of the event with Vancouver Island North, because it's sometimes very tough to get everybody on the island from Victoria all the way up to Port Hardy and such. So we invited them to participate in our first couple of hours of our event, and they brought down 30 children from their district to share with us their Indigenous learning and programming and songs and treasures and dances. And it really was an extraordinary few hours with these young people from kindergarten, well, grade 3 or 4 were part of the drumming team and things like that. So with the also the participation of our Chief Rakelma, who was a participant as well with us at this event, who one of the dancing routines, somehow they managed to get to Mr. Chief Rakelma ahead of time to ask him if he would like to be in the dance, part of the dance. And it's attached story. I can't quite remember the whole thing, but there's a lot of feathers flying and certainly some marching and drumming and things like that. And Chief Rakelma, he just stood right in there, and I was really hoping that he was not going to stumble on anything, because there was a lot of movement. But I understood in the end, which was quite charming, is that the dance that they had brought to the table or to our event was really an originating dance from his family, his clan.
That's true.
That's
right.
It was profoundly meaningful to him, not only to work alongside a couple of young students in regalia and masks and things, but in all, it was a tremendous learning experience for me to understand that his family's history transcended up the island with this dance. We then showcased our student voice. As Dr. Jory said, we had KSS students talk about the climate action, and the BSS student council talked about a myriad of things that they did and shared. And I was very proud and very heartwarming at the end that they received a standing ovation our students for the presentations that they'd made and the information that they'd shared and their honesty. One cannot get away from having student council, student voice, or whatever, to be very, very passionate and honest. So that was wonderful. We then, and I would like to thank the early learning team for our district, Sheila Morrison, Tandy Gunn, and Denise Spencer-Dahl for sharing a lot of valuable information about our whole strategy with early learning, and it was lovely to see. And then capped off by our own Dr. Jory on strategic plan, with good comic relief in between, because that was coming up to 8:30 after starting at 1 o'clock. And so people were kind of wanting, I think, to head to the second round of appies in the bar. But all in all, I also too would like to thank my fellow trustees for helping with introductions, giving thanks, doing registration and everything. It was truly a team event. And of course, to Karen Hurt, our executive assistant, yeoman service in the background to us, to doing and creating all of the seamless logistics that we experienced. The only thing that was noted to me was that there was no decaf coffee. And then I can't quite understand why, when you have a coffee station, how does someone miss out on a decaf coffee? But anyway, it was wonderful. We had a member the next day, Saturday, we had a member of the directors of the BC Association of School Business Officials, the group that Secretary Treasurer Ron Amos belongs to, Jason Reed from Saanich, try to weave some of the numbers and the budgets and the balancing of strategic plans through to financial planning, budgeting, and long-range financial planning, which is now on our radar as being something that districts must do. And then we wrapped up with labor relations and human resources. So fun-filled topics, great learning for us as trustees, but I can't thank all of the people, the members of our board, as well as our senior staff and learning team that came along with us. And I plan to visit the KSS students tomorrow to thank them personally, because they have during their flex time another session on their climate action symposium that they're running in April, to congratulate them on some great initiatives coming forward. So any trustees like to jump in and add further comments? Trustee Young.
Yeah, I think that you've explained it very well, but the high points for me, Vancouver Island North brought in some beautiful masks, and having been to Alert Bay and gone to the museum there, if you ever get a chance, folks,
Wonderful.
It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
And one of the masks that they brought, they were debuting it, and what an honor to be a witness to that. So it was very moving. And I think the other thing, I really want to thank the KSS and the Bolinas students. They were the highlight of the whole thing. I think hands down. I mean, the teaching and learning team was fabulous. And Dr. Jory with the strategic planning was just the beautiful, the ice cream on the cake. But our students they just speak so well. They were so fabulous. And as some of you know, I got some Purdy's chocolates the other day, so they'll be going to those two groups. Probably won't get there before Easter, but what can you do? And I think the other thing, I picked up the strategic plan. The person from Campbell River dropped a few of their strategic plans. And I got to tell you, there's a part of me that's quite competitive. No doubt. Hey, and just looking at their strategic plan and our strategic plan, ours just is so much better. It's head and shoulders above. And so I want to shout out a little bit to everybody who was involved in that process. We have a very strong plan of action, and we'll leave it up to Dr. Jory to make sure that it happens. So Thank you and happy spring break to everybody. Happy Easter. I'll be joining you from Vancouver in April, so I won't be able to come to volleyball games, but I'll see you around. Take care.
Thanks, Trustee Young. Any other comments, trustees? I'll move then to public question period. If you could come on screen, that's the only way I can see you. I see an S.G. Celine, if you could come on screen. Yes, Celine Griffin, yeah. Please, go ahead. Thank you. You're on mute.
You're
hear
still
me?
muted.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
hi. Well, first, thank you to all the trustees. I do believe that they have the students' interests above everything. I did send an email prior to the meeting. I'm not sure if the trustees have a chance to read it. But anyways, in the essence of time, I have to say, I am very, very disappointed for the lack of consultation. A survey doesn't do the job. Dr. Jory might say it's just 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes might mean 1 less hour of work for a family, right? So I understand that maybe you're trying to look into the students' best interest by they need more sleep in, it will be best for them. I agree for the high school students, not for the elementary students. So now we're thinking about, okay, well, 5 minutes now, which if I understood correctly, it was just Dr. Jory's decision, just I don't know what the process is, but what the process is, but my understanding is that it was just because his decision, and please correct me if I'm wrong. And second, how do the 5 minutes would help? And I know it has been defeated, right? I mean, it's not going. If I got the information correct, the 5 minutes will not start in April 2nd, correct? No.
I'm sorry. Let me
Sorry.
just ask for a clarification. What school do your children attend?
Well, as one of the affected ones, but I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of parents. I will let you. I can tell you later. My kids are at Oceanside. They are in a grade 6 and grade 7, and I have to say, one of your first comments, Dr. Jory, was that it was just a correction to the operations department and the Ministry of Transportation, something to do with that.
No,
So
no,
that's
not quite it.
You said you mentioned that you said the word correction, a correction to something. So my question is, we have been using this schedule for the last 7 or 8 years. Why making that correction now? That's one question. And second, besides the benefit that Dr. Jory thinks would happen to the students, is there any other benefit? Because I can tell you, there are so many other issues that schools are dealing with. I don't see how changing the school schedule right now is going to overall benefit the students. And I mean, and I can be very selfish. My kids they only have 1 more year at elementary school, right? I'm like, after that is like they will be in high school. But I'm angry at the lack of consultation. But to be honest, I'm angry because that wouldn't happen in the private sector. That will simply not happen that way. And I'm trying to be very respectful, but Oceanside Elementary is suffering with crosswalk issues, right? Because Oceanside Elementary, it's in no man's land. We can't even find the right person
to help us paint a crosswalk in one of the intersections, because it's either RDN, City of Parksville, or School Board Matter. So the fact that Dr. Jory insists on bringing this matter to the table, man, I don't know what the priorities are. And those are my 2 cents. And I would appreciate if the trustees advocate for a better consultation process on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine. Dr. Jory, would you like to speak? Because
Yeah, briefly, I'll just clarify that the 5-minute change has nothing to do with the research, has nothing to do with equity from that broader sense, at least. This was a correction, as I said, and I don't know when the change actually happened, but I will say this: we have a group of kids that are unsupervised because the bus routes don't link up. It's a substantial number of kids, and it's a number of minutes, and they're out there in front of Bolinas. And what both principals have told me is that it's an issue, and they're concerned about it. The Oceanside principal told me this is their number 1 parent complaint is lack of supervision over in front of Bolinas. And the Bolinas principal told me that this is a nonstop issue at their school. So that 5 minutes, and with you agree that that's a lot or a little bit, is to mitigate against that. And that is really the issue in regard to those 2 bell times. So apologize for the lack of consultation, but I will say this. When we go to consult, as per the chart that that Trustee Young brought up, we would like to do that when it's in earnest, right? And when we're actually going to do something with that information. Now, given what you've just said, we can certainly circle back and have a more fulsome conversation. But I don't know how we're going to address the issue of supervision in the meantime. I am concerned about those kids out there, and so are the 2 schools, and I'll leave it at that.
I'm just gonna.
thank you.
I'm not trying. Sorry, I'm not trying to be in the with all due respect to everybody attending and to Dr. Jory. Why the lack of supervision is now a very important issue? Why it hasn't been in previous years? Why now? Like I mean, if I'm being honest, the 80 kids who receive the backpack program, I guarantee you there's more, and there will be more. Oceanside Elementary is one of those schools that it seems like a privileged school, but I don't know. I work in the community, and I'm starting to sense a different story. So when we're trying to push an issue based on just one tiny aspect, which is the lack of supervision for these 2 kids, without looking at other alternatives, it feels and it seems that there must be a hidden agenda, that there's like, it is not really on behalf of the students. That's how I feel. And I'm gonna give the floor to someone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine. Yep, thank you. Angel?
Oh, thank you. I wasn't sure if my hand had gone up or not. In one of my emails, I believe to you, Eve, regarding this, my question was, if we know there's a problem of 5 to 7 minutes where a number of our primary and kindergarten children are being left unsupervised at Bolinas, is there not a way that we can extend a current EA from Bolinas to be able to go and observe and be on supervision for those kids? Especially if it's only between now and the end of June. If I understood correctly, it's because of a semester change that has really brought it to the forefront, to our vision that there is a problem.
I would have to defer to Dr. Jory because that's an operational decision.
Yeah.
And whether extensions manage it or whatever, the safety of the kids would be the focus for sure. So I defer to Dr. Jory.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that wouldn't be a cost. And by the way, this is sort of reared its head because of the additional time in the Bellina schedule that's made it worse for this year. And remember, I'm doing this at the request of the transportation department, who alerted us to the pressures their drivers are feeling, and then the principals supported that pressure through those conversations. As far as putting supervision out there, we could do that. It's not a cost issue. This is not a substantial amount of money, but we'd be taking somebody off a job. We can't hire somebody specifically for that job. It's not enough time to put somebody out there. We'd have to take somebody off a job in the school and reallocate them out there so they wouldn't be supporting the students that they're supposed to be or would normally be serving. And that person wouldn't be known to those kids. And so I would be reluctant to put a stranger among them and say, okay, now you have to mind this adult that you've never met. Supervision doesn't work effectively when there's no relationship. And so that's one of the factors that caused us to not really consider that seriously.
Trustee Austin.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Celine for your comments. And I do, I think the 5-minute piece is purely, that really is an operational thing that's trying to make everything work at the schools, for the buses. And to your comment and your point, which was good, how come that there hasn't been this change or concern over the last 7 years if it's been the same time at Oceanside? But I think that's been addressed because there's been 2 other schools that in that time have independently sort of shifted their bell schedule. Yeah. So now it's sort of come to a head. Just one school doing it maybe wasn't enough to upset the apple cart. But when 2 other schools were doing it as well, that sort of created a little bit of a domino effect in our transportation system. And so I see this as sort of righting it again, putting everything back so that things can be right at all those schools and that there isn't this problem that's sort of been created. And then as for the other topic, which is separate than that one, that's a totally operational safety thing. And then the other one, the conversation that we had our motion about in terms of the 10 minutes, that motion was defeated. So I think what it's done basically is allowed us this time now to have these consultations and the talks with students, more talk with the parents and the students and the staff, and it will be coming back to the board table in the next school year. But now the heads up has been given to everybody to say, okay, we're going to have these conversations, so participate and please give us your feedback. So thanks.
Thank you,
again.
Yep, thank you for the question, Celine. Superintendent Jory, do you want to revisit or you just hand up still?
No, I just note that Jill's starting to text me because she's got an idea how we might solve this some other way. Rather than say, okay, here's an idea, everybody, we'll let staff confer on that and then go back and communicate with our principals. But we'll see if we can do something that will take a little bit of the pressure off. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you, everybody. Have a very safe, enjoyable spring break. Rest, fill up your bucket again, and we head into April, May, June. And could I ask for a mover to adjourn the meeting, please? Steve Kellogg, thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you for all your conversation and thoughtful contributions to the meeting tonight and our topics.